You are listening to the Nurse Documentation Podcast, brought to you by Nytngale.
Nurse documentation. Protect the care you gave. Protect the license you hold. With every note you save. Nytngale, where good care is safe.
Welcome to The Deep Dive, the place where we cut through the noise, stack up the source material, and get straight to the knowledge you need to be effective. Today, we are focused entirely on that critical intersection of clinical practice and legal defensibility. We're talking specifically to nurses, nurse leaders, and documentation professionals.
And we're moving away from the theoretical stuff.
Way past it. We're doing what we call a surgical strike, right into the heart of compliance with a really practical examination of an essential resource. It's called the Compliance First Guide to Behavioral Observation and Risk Documentation.
You know, that title really is a mission statement, not just some label. Our goal today is, I think, operational mastery.
Yeah, I agree.
We're unpacking a complete system. It's designed to help you write objective, legally defensible notes that consistently pass internal review.
And not just sometimes.
No, reliably, every time.
Yeah.
The goal here is to eliminate that endless, frustrating cycle of rewrites and delays that just consumes your time and, frankly, drains your professional confidence.
Exactly. Our target listener today is that person who feels that pit in their stomach when they hit submit on a complex behavioral note after a 12-hour shift.
We've all been there.
Oh, absolutely. So this deep dive is about transforming that dread into certainty. We're handing you the specific frameworks, the templates, and the language toolkit you need to transform your documentation process starting today. But let's just zoom in on the main issue right away. Why is behavioral documentation so high risk? I mean, why are the notes on aggression, self-harm, refusal of care, or elopement? Why are those the ones scrutinized so heavily by auditors, by risk management, regulators, and legal discovery?
Well, it's because those specific notes, they represent the points of highest clinical and organizational liability. It's that sense.
Behavior is action.
Behavior is action, and action results in consequences. It could be an injury, property damage, a policy violation, or other adverse outcomes. So when a subjective or a vague note is written about one of these high-risk events, it creates ambiguity.
Ambiguity about what, exactly?
About whether staff followed policy, whether the clinical rationale was sound, whether the intervention was even appropriate. You have to consider this. Legal teams and auditors, they were not in the room with you. They don't know the client. They don't know the unit dynamics. All they have is the text.
Just the words on the screen.
Just the words. And the quality of that text becomes the only verifiable evidence of your clinical rationale, your professionalism, and your adherence to safety standards. And this is often months or even years after the fact.
Right.
So if you write something like, client seemed dangerous, that's just an opinion. It's impossible to audit. It's impossible to verify in court. The text itself has to prove the facts.
So we really need to fundamentally stop thinking of charting as just a task we rush through at the end of the day.
It's so much more than that.
We have to reframe it, just as the guide champions, as a professional protection tool. Every single word you type is a legal record that reflects your actions and your rationale. And this isn't just about protecting the organization.
Yeah.
It's about protecting your license and your career.
It is about self-defense. And the great thing about the Compliance First system that's outlined in this guide is that it removes all the guesswork. You will walk away from this with practical, repeatable frameworks. We're talking about the 5 C's, compliance-adapted ABC and SRA's models, and specific language conversion glossaries.
And it has actual templates, right?
Yes, printable templates for high-risk scenarios. General, self-harm, violence, and elopement. And, critically, a QA reviewer checklist and a scoring rubric.
So you're not just guessing what reviewers want.
You are proactively meeting the measurable standards they use to score your note. You know the test before you take it.
What's really fascinating here is how often a professional's good intentions are completely, undermined by a weak structure or just a poor language choice in their documentation.
It happens all the time.
That's why we're focusing so hard on this idea of converting subjective impressions, what you felt or what you thought, into measurable, verifiable statements.
What you saw or what you heard.
Exactly. This is all about establishing a system where clarity and neutrality are the non-negotiable defaults.
Right.
Okay, let's unpack this core and honestly painful problem. Why do dedicated professionals charting under intense pressure keep getting their notes flagged? The source material just nails this common frustration with what it calls the moment you hit submit paradox. You know the feeling. You finish a demanding shift. You type out this lengthy, seemingly comprehensive note.
You feel like you've covered everything.
You do. You click submit, and then often hours later, that correction arrives in your inbox. Subjective language, missing time detail, risk level unclear. Staff intervention chronology is mixed with client behavior.
And that endless loop of write, revise, rescind. It's a huge energy and confidence drain. It really is.
So why does it happen?
The reason it happens is something we call subjectivity creep. It's insidious. These subjective phrases slip in because they're conversational words we use every single day. Words like aggressive, non-compliant, upset, calm, manipulative, dramatic, hostile. The guide is uncompromisingly clear on this. None of these words are defensible in a legal record.
Why not?
Because they are interpretation rather than observation. They're your interpretation of an internal state that cannot be verified by an external reader. And, they often carry a judgmental bias, even if you don't intend them to.
I think we really need to slow down on that point. That's the difference between saying client was anxious and saying client paced the hallway for 3 minutes, approximately 40 steps, at zone 9.2.
Exactly. The first is an impression. It's a feeling. The second is a verifiable, concrete fact that is anchored in time and in measure.
It's the difference between documenting a feeling and documenting physical movement.
Precisely. And the core of this documentation failure, it often lies not in malice, but in the cognitive shortcuts we all take when we're rushed or fatigued or carrying existing expectations about a client.
You mean bias?
Yes. The Foundations chapter of the guide details 3 major bias traps that just destroy objectivity in a note.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, there's the halo effect. This is when a single positive or negative trait, maybe the client is really charismatic, or maybe they've been disruptive for weeks, it colors your entire note.
So if a client is generally well-liked...
Right. Staff might inadvertently write a note that downplays a minor escalation because, they like the person.
And the remedy for that?
The remedy is simple. You treat each event as new. You focus only on the behavior descriptions that happened right then and there, not on generalized personality assessments from the past.
I can see how that plays out. You're writing about a client who has historically been challenging, and so you interpret a comment as a veiled threat, even if, in another context, it might have just been sarcasm.
And that leads directly to the second trap, confirmation bias. This is when you notice only what fits an existing expectation or a diagnosis. If you expect the client to be disruptive or to escalate during shift change, you might only record the escalating behaviors.
And you completely miss the other side of it.
You completely miss the fact that they de-escalated themselves for 10 minutes right after the incident. So the remedy is to capture the full context. Note the improving or neutralizing behaviors just as much as the escalating ones. Capture the full sequence, not just the part that confirms what you already believed.
And then there's most toxic trap, right? The one that makes risk managers break out in a cold sweat.
Mind reading. The attempt to assign motive.
Right. He wanted attention.
It is the biggest trap because it introduces non-verifiable judgment into the record. We must avoid statements like, he wanted attention, or she was trying to manipulate staff.
How should you think about it instead?
Think of it this way. If you are called to a court or a deposition 2 years from now, opposing counsel cannot cross-examine your statement that he wanted attention. It's just your assumption.
There's nothing to question.
Nothing. The guide is very clear. You must avoid motive statements. If intent is relevant to the risk assessment, for example, in a safety check, it has to be captured via a direct client statement. You quote their intent. You do not infer it or analyze it yourself.
So we just keep circling back to the central truth. Your intention does not matter, only what is written in that legal record. If you write an opinion, you're inviting a dispute.
If you write a fact, you provide evidence.
Exactly.
And let's talk for a second about how innocent wording can become a liability landmine.
Yeah.
I found this section in the guide on global statements to be particularly necessary for nurses who are charting under pressure.
What are global statements?
They're insidious because they introduce generalization and exaggeration, which instantly erodes your credibility. Words like always, never, or repeatedly.
Because they imply you know everything that's ever happened.
Which is impossible to prove. If you write, client always refuses medication, and the defense attorney finds just 3 instances where the client accepted meds, your entire record is now called into question.
Just based on that one global statement.
Yes. It undermines the objective standard of the entire clinical record. That statement has to be replaced by specifying the frequency within the event itself. Client declined prompts 3 times between 14.05 and 14.11.
That is concrete, measurable, and defensible.
Correct.
That distinction replacing generalization with quantifiable facts it's really the cornerstone of compliance.
Yep.
And to act as quality guardrails against all these failure points, the bias traps, subjectivity, global statements, the guide introduces an overarching framework.
The 5 C's.
The 5 C's.
The 5 C's are the essential, measurable standard that reviewers score your documentation against. They are the criteria your note absolutely must meet to be considered legally defensible.
So let's break them down. How does a note fail or succeed based on each C?
Okay. Number 1 is clear. The writing has to be unambiguous, so a neutral third party, a reader, understands the sequence of events without having to guess.
An unclear note would be something like, client was angry and things got out of hand.
Right. A clear note states, client was observed to have a flushed face and yelled at a peer at 19.30. Number 2 is concrete. This means using observable, measurable, time-bound details. And this is where most notes fail.
So not concrete would be, client was upset for a long time.
Yes. A concrete note says, client cried for 15 minutes, specifically from 20.0 to 20.15, and refused 2 verbal prompts from staff. You can count the minutes and you can count the prompts.
So if I write, client was very agitated, I'm failing the concrete test instantly.
Absolutely, because very agitated is both subjective and it's non-quantifiable. The reviewer is going to ask, how many steps? How loud was his voice? For how long did it last?
Yeah.
Okay, number 3 is complete. The note must include all the required identifiers, the necessary context, the full behavioral sequence, and the outcomes.
And a note fails this when?
The note that fails completion might mention a restraint, but then it fails to document the notification time to the physician or the risk manager. That's a massive regulatory failure. Completeness means following the full note anatomy template that's provided in the guide. Number 4 is compliant. This means the note aligns with internal policy, with regulatory standards, and with your specific professional scope of practice. If your policy requires you to check on a high-risk client every 15 minutes, but your note only shows entries every 30 minutes,
And it fails.
your note, no matter how detailed it is, fails the compliant test. And finally, number 5, concise. You have to eliminate fluff, opinion, jargon, and redundant phrasing. A note that fails conciseness might include these lengthy justifications of why the staff chose a particular action.
So what does a concise note do instead?
A concise note simply states the action and the factual observations that triggered it. You document the facts, and the facts themselves provide the justification.
That framework gives the frontline professional a simple, repeatable checklist. If your note doesn't hit all 5 of those elements, it has a high chance of failing review, regardless of your good intentions.
That's right.
We need to remember that compliance isn't about effort. It's about measurable alignment with these objective standards. Here's where it gets really interesting, because now we move from just identifying the failure points to actually establishing the professional standard. We need to stop guessing what reviewers want and start anchoring our notes to verifiable reality. And this process, it starts and ends with that foundational distinction between observation and interpretation.
And the rule of thumb from the source is the simplest, most powerful tool you can carry into a high-stress charting situation. It's this. If you cannot see it, hear it, or count it, it does not belong in the observation line.
That's it?
That's it. If it is sensory data or quantifiable action, it belongs in the note. If it is an evaluation, a diagnosis, or an internal assessment of their mood, it does not.
Let's run through more examples of this, because this is where the daily change happens for people. We need to move away from that diagnostic shorthand and get toward descriptive reality.
Certainly. So a weak example would be, client was demanding and uncooperative. That's interpretation and judgment.
And the defensible version.
A defensible example would be, client requested a second snack at 16.10. Staff denied the request per diet order, and client stood at the nurse's station window for 5 minutes without speaking. That's observation, facts, time, and duration.
Okay, another one.
A weak example. Client was hostile towards the group facilitator. Again, that's your interpretation. That's a judgment call.
Right.
A defensible example would be, client crossed arms, shifted weight, maintained a heavy frown, and sat 3 feet away from the group circle, stating loudly at 10.05, "This is pointless."
That's observation, body language, a direct quote, and a timestamp.
Exactly.
You know, it's interesting. The defensible documentation is longer, but that added length is quality length. It's full of these specific anchors that make the whole note verifiable.
That's the absolute crux of neutral defensible language mastery. We have to quantify behavior to achieve defensibility. And this involves 3 critical areas of detail.
What are they?
First, quantities. Use hard numbers. This is where most busy nurses stumble. They claim they can't count things during a crisis, but you have to use what you can.
Like what kind of things?
Steps taken, minutes that have elapsed, frequency counts, items thrown, or meals refused. And if an exact count is impractical in a high-speed situation, you use an estimate, but you must mark that estimate as approximate.
Why is that important?
Because it maintains transparency and honesty. For instance, client raised voice to an approximate 80 decibels based on proximity at 18.12.
But wait, how do I capture that level of detail when I'm in the middle of managing a crisis in real time?
You capture the facts as soon as it's safely possible. Often that means using brief notes on your shift report sheet to anchor the critical metrics: the start time, the peak behavior, and the de-escalation time. Remember, the reviewer knows you are in a crisis. They don't expect poetic prose. They expect clear, time-stamped chronological anchors.
That makes sense. What's the second area?
Second is quotes. Direct quotes are absolutely non-negotiable for verbal behavior, especially when it relates to risk or intent or consent versus refusal.
So if it's high stakes, you quote it directly.
You quote it directly. Do not paraphrase emotional content or statements of intent. Use clear tags like client stated at 08.20, I want to go home now. And you have to ensure the quote is accurate, even if the language is offensive or derogatory. You're documenting what was said, not filtering it.
And the third area of detail?
Third is time, context, and sequence clarity. Chronology is non-negotiable. Use 24-hour time consistently. But critically, we need to understand how context improves risk interpretation without adding your opinion.
Explain that. What do you mean by context?
Context means describing the environment. The setting, for instance. Day room was noisy with 3 peers arguing. Or precipitating factors like client received a phone call from a family member who was upset. Or even safety conditions like staff ratio was 1:8 at the time, all exits were locked.
And why do those details matter so much?
They matter immensely when reviewers reconstruct the scene because they show why the environment may have contributed to the escalation.
So that separates the professional note from, like, a casual narrative. We establish the facts, we anchor them in time, and we provide the setting, but without offering any personal analysis of why the person acted that way.
Absolutely. And once you master the language and the focus on objective facts, then you need the right tool for the right situation. The guide offers 3 essential observation models, and each one is adapted for compliance, not just for general clinical charting.
Okay, what's the first one?
First is the ABC model. That's antecedent, behavior, consequence. Its strength is in clarifying behavioral triggers and outcomes. It's best used for short, discrete behavior events.
So it forces you to look at the whole picture.
It forces you to document what happened before the behavior, that's the antecedent, the behavior itself, using objective facts, and what happened after the staff response, which is the consequence. This helps future staff understand why a behavior occurred so they can adjust the environment proactively rather than just reacting to the behavior itself.
And second, there's the staple of clinical notes, the SOAP format. But the guide says it requires significant adaptation to become compliance-friendly, right? Especially under audit scrutiny.
Correct. The compliance-adapted SOP requires some pretty severe constraints. The subjective, or S section, must be minimal. It should be limited strictly to direct quotes or clearly identified reports from the client or other sources.
And the O.
The objective, or O section, carries the entire weight of the evidence. All the facts, counts, times, and observations go there. Then, assessment A and plan P must be concise and clearly within the nurse's scope of practice.
What needs to be stripped out of a standard SOP note, then?
Long subjective narratives, inferred feelings, and especially diagnostic statements or judgments in the A section that go beyond the nurse's scope. The A section has to be restricted to summarizing the risk level and the effectiveness of your intervention, based only on the objective data in O.
So if I write in the A section, client demonstrates underlying hostility requiring deep emotional processing, that's an instant flag.
Instantly. Because it's a clinical evaluation outside the nursing scope, right, and it relies on non-verifiable interpretation.
It fails the compliant test.
Precisely. It fails the compliant test by exceeding your role, and it relies on subjective interpretation rather than objective evidence.
Okay, what's the third model?
And finally, when things go sideways and speed and clarity are paramount, the timestamp narrative takes over. Timestamp narratives, they really shine during fast-evolving, high-acuity events, where minute-by-minute clarity is vital for chronology, for handoffs, and for audit defensibility.
It's all about preserving the timeline.
It preserves chronological integrity. And this is also where hybrid models can come into play. You can use timestamp narratives, 14.0, 003, 14.07, and then embed ABC segments within a specific time slot to clarify a particular turning point in a complex sequence.
So you get both.
You get the minute-by-minute chronology and the behavioral function analysis.
This detailed focus on structure brings us to the core anatomy of a defensible note, which, as the guide points out, mirrors exactly how reviewers reconstruct events and check for policy compliance. Every defensible note follows a specific structure. First, identifiers. The client ID, location, staff present, any witnesses.
Critical.
Then, context. The setting. Environmental conditions, any precipitating factors. After that, observed behavior, and this is measured, time-stamped facts only.
Only facts.
Then your staff response. Specific actions you took, also time-stamped. Then the client response to your actions, their immediate reaction, and their return to baseline. And finally, the outcomes. Their status at the end, the assigned risk level, notifications you made, and any follow-up needed.
That anatomy is your most actionable takeaway. If you follow that checklist, you automatically avoid the most common pitfalls.
And the most frequent failure is what?
It's mixing staff response with client behavior, or inserting your justifications into the objective facts. When you separate these components clearly, the reviewer's job becomes easy, and your note is instantly more credible because it presents the evidence before it presents the intervention.
Right.
And let's revisit that need for context without opinion. You provide context, such as day room was noisy with 3 peers arguing at 70 decibels, or precipitating factor, visitor denial due to policy violation. You describe the condition, you don't judge the client's reaction to it.
Which supports your risk interpretation.
Exactly. It shows the environmental stressor without adding your personal evaluation, which is vital for compliance.
And tying this back to the objective language mastery, we have to remember the rules for quotes. High-stakes quotes must be direct.
No paraphrasing.
But for less critical verbal interactions, you can paraphrase neutrally, but you must tag the speaker and the time for both. That preserves the integrity of your sources within the note, showing the reviewer exactly where the information came from.
And we really cannot overstate the importance of quantifying frequency, duration, and intensity. This is what elevates a note from a diary entry to a clinical record.
Give us an example.
Replacing client yelled with client raised voice to approximately 80 decibels at 18.18 based on staff meter gives the auditor a concrete anchor.
Oh, okay.
Replacing client paced a lot with client pace from 09.10 to 09.18, 8 minutes total, completing approximately 12 loops of the hallway. This demonstrates a professional specificity, and it reduces reviewer friction because there's nothing left for them to guess at.
Right, it's all there.
This is the section where theory translates directly into license protection. Objectivity saves licenses when incidents escalate, because vague documentation just fails under legal scrutiny.
So we have to apply it.
We have to apply precise language and the right models to the scenarios that get flagged most frequently in audits, complaints, and legal reviews.
Okay, so let's start with the most visible risk, the one that carries the highest liability for injury: agitation or aggression.
Yes. And reviewers demand precise reporting here because of mandated reporting laws and workplace safety rules.
So what are they looking for?
They require documentation to reflect the highest threshold that was reached, and these are defined by what the guide calls threshold cues.
Okay.
First is a threat. That's a verbal or written statement expressing an intent to harm, like, I will punch you.
Then what?
Then a gesture. This is posturing, a raised fist, or stepping aggressively into someone's personal space. After that, an attempt. That's swinging and missing, or throwing an object that doesn't make contact.
And finally,
a completed act. This is actual physical contact, property damage, or a recorded injury.
And the common error here is just jumping straight to the label.
Exactly. Writing client was aggressive, instead of describing the actions that meet the legal criteria for aggression.
Okay, so give us the weak version.
Weak documentation. Client was aggressive and out of control. We had to intervene. This provides zero evidence, and it sounds like you're just justifying your actions after the fact.
It's totally subjective.
Totally. Now here's the defensible documentation, using quantification and the note anatomy we just talked about.
Okay.
Context. Client had just been denied a requested phone call per physician order. At 14.07, client stood abruptly, clenched fists, raised voice audible in hallway and stated, "I will punch you."
That's the threat.
That's the threat threshold. Then client advanced, maintaining distance within 1 foot of staff for approximately 30 seconds. Staff requested client sit. Client sat when asked. And then the response. Staff response. Offered guided imagery and refocusing task at 14.10.
And the outcome.
Outcome. Client accepted task and voice returned to baseline volume. This note, it cites the antecedent, the exact threshold, proximity, volume, time, duration, and a direct quote. All of that is critical for your defense.
Wow, that contrast is striking. The first note sounds like the nurse was overwhelmed and reacting. The second note sounds like the nurse was in control, executing a measurable intervention based on a clear assessment.
Let's move on to refusals of care, specifically medication non-adherence or refusal of treatments. Wording matters so much here because it relates directly to client rights and informed consent.
So what does the documentation have to show?
It has to show 2 things. That the client was informed, meaning education was given, and that their autonomy was respected. Using the label non-compliant implies fault on their part, rather than documenting a choice that they made after informed consent principles were met.
Okay, give us the weak version here.
Weak documentation. Client refused meds again because they are being difficult, non-compliant. This is judgmental, unprofessional, and legally weak.
And the defensible version?
Defensible documentation, which is respectful and factual. At U8.00, staff offered scheduled medication and provided education on potential side effects. For example, fatigue. Client stated, "I need to pray first and we'll take it after."
So you document the reason?
Yes. Staff confirmed prayer space availability and offered to return at U8.15. At U8.15, client accepted and ingested 2 tablets with water as observed by staff.
What does that sequence prove?
It proves you didn't just label them and walk away. You intervened with respect, you followed a sequence that honored the client's autonomy, and you still achieved the care goal.
Okay, our third high-risk scenario is boundary-challenging behavior, which includes things like elopement or exit seeking.
These are very high-risk elements because they often involve a direct breach of a safety protocol, and that leads to immediate regulatory exposure.
So what are reviewers looking for in these notes?
They're looking for specific time anchors, the duration the person was out of supervision, and clear risk factors. When you're documenting an elopement, the chronology of staff discovery, staff action, and all your notifications is absolutely paramount.
What's the weak documentation look like?
Weak documentation. Client kept trying to run off, so we watched them closer. This provides no proof of intervention, no details, nothing.
Right, and the defensible note.
Defensible documentation, using sequence and intervention. Context. Client verbalized anxiety about the denied day pass. At 11:40, client stood near exit door for 2 minutes, scanning the hallway and looking through a window. Client attempted to pull on door handle twice.
So you're detailing the actual behavior?
Yes. Then the intervention. Staff offered supervised walk to distract. Client accepted the offer. Walk started at 11:45 and lasted 10 minutes on the courtyard. And the outcome. Client returned to baseline at 11:55, remaining in view of staff. Risk level maintained at moderate due to continued exit focus.
So that shows the attempts, the duration, the intervention you offered, the time-anchored return to safety, and it justifies why the risk level is still moderate.
Exactly.
And finally, let's talk about the most sensitive and, frankly, legally critical area. Safety concerns, particularly self-harm indicators. This is often where a nurse's license is most directly scrutinized.
It really is. And here, the focus absolutely must be on linking your observation to the 5 essential risk criteria that are defined in the guide.
Which are?
Intent, plan, means, history, and protective factors. If your note doesn't show this methodical assessment, your risk assignment is just arbitrary. It's an opinion.
Okay, weak version.
Weak documentation. Client seems suicidal. High risk, notified MD. This is subjective, and it provides absolutely no rationale for your decision.
And the defensible version, which aligns with the risk criteria.
Defensible documentation. At 20.10, staff assessed client for risk per policy. Client stated, "I do not want to live like this."
So that's intent.
Intent is present. When asked about plan, client stated no plan.
Client is absent.
Correct. Client identified protective factor. "I want to see my son next month." So protective factors are present.
So you put it all together.
Right. Based on daily thoughts without plan or means, risk was assigned as moderate per policy matrix. Staff increased check frequency from every 30 minutes to every 15 minutes for 2 hours, starting at 20.20. Physician Dr. Smith notified at 20.30.
That's the key difference, isn't it? The defensible note shows the rationale. It ties the objective evidence, the thoughts, the no plan, the protective factor, to the assigned level of moderate and then to the action, which was increased checks and MD notification.
It completely eliminates the judgment and it replaces it with a structured, verifiable assessment process.
Right.
And, if intent, plan, and means are all present within a near-term time frame, the level becomes imminent, and your action has to reflect an emergency response. The downstream importance of these wording choices just cannot be overstated. When you use the structured templates from the guide, you automatically include witness names, chain of custody details, and notification times, all of which are critical for your defense.
Okay, let's shift our focus to the professional benefit of all this. I mean, documentation is a form of self-care, isn't it? Strong notes reduce your anxiety after a shift, and they build a measurable standard of credibility that benefits you and the whole team.
That anxiety we talked about earlier, it comes from knowing that your memory might fail you later, or that your subjective phrasing might get twisted against you.
Right.
If you capture the facts objectively and in real time using these frameworks, you can trust your record entirely. That anxiety just disappears.
How does strong, objective documentation specifically improve handovers and team communication?
Well, clarity reduces ambiguity instantly. When a note uses objective facts like pacing for 8 minutes, 12 loops to the hallway, instead of a subjective label like agitated.
The next shift knows exactly what to look for.
Exactly. The next shift receives a specific behavioral status, not a feeling or an impression. They know exactly what measurable behaviors they're inheriting and what baseline they need to look for. And this drastically reduces the risk of interdisciplinary communication failures. Furthermore, strong documentation ensures the consistency that's required between different reporting mechanisms. We're talking about the internal clinical note and the mandated incident report. And this is where the guide's SE pre-grid comes in, ensuring that these two documents, which are both highly scrutinized, tell the exact same story.
Walk us through the FET grid and what happens when that alignment fails, because factual inconsistency is an immediate red flag for any reviewer or opposing counsel.
So, Fact T ensured consistency. F is for facts. Both documents have to originate from the same observations. Don't copy and paste the text, but ensure the factual details, the quotes, the times are consistent.
Yeah.
A is for alignment. Times, observations, and staff actions must match across the clinical note and the incident report. C is for corrections. Use the appropriate protocol, like the SAFE protocol, which we'll cover, in both documents when you need to make a change. And T is for timelines. Present your time-ordered sequences without any gaps or contradictions.
Give us an example of where this goes wrong.
Okay, we once saw a case where the nurse's note said, client pushed staff once at 15:0. But the organizational incident report, which was written by a manager, said client was agitated and aggressive, requiring physical restraint at 15:0.
Oh, that's a huge difference.
It's a massive inconsistency. It signals a factual misalignment, and it invites disputes and scrutiny. The auditor will flag that immediately and ask, was it a single push, or was it an escalation requiring restraint? Why don't the records agree on the severity or the intervention? The factual consistency of the FACT grid eliminates that vulnerability.
That's terrifying. It signals factual inconsistency, and it just erodes all credibility for the entire episode. And that's why we have to maintain absolute integrity in the audit trail, which means eliminating those silent edits that break the audit history. The guide emphasizes the necessity of the safe edit protocol for corrections, late entries, and addenda.
The SAFE protocol is mandatory for transparency and for legal defensibility during discovery. It shows you're maintaining an honest record, not covering one up.
So break down SAFE.
S is for stamp. Every correction or late entry must be electronically stamped with the current time and date. A is for author. Include your name and your role.
Yeah.
And never, ever edit another person's entry.
Right.
F is for flag. Clearly label the entry as a correction, a late entry, or an addendum. And E is for explain. State the reason for the entry and what was added or changed. For example, correction, time updated to 14.05 to reflect security video review and ensure fact grid alignment.
That explain step is where the good faith comes in, right? You're showing reviewers that you're proactively fixing minor errors to maintain honesty and accuracy.
And that matters immensely when you're defending the record.
For the nurse leaders and documentation professionals listening, consistency is really the currency of credibility with leadership and with legal teams.
It is. When your notes pass review 100% of the time, reviewers trust your submissions and they trust your professional judgment. The guide promotes using QA metrics like the 30-day compliance sprint KPIs, things like first pass approval rate, correction rate, and turnaround time.
And visible numbers prove mastery.
They do. And they support your requests for resources or policy changes based on actual data.
And you can self-audit, right?
Critically, you can self-audit against the past review rubric, which mirrors exactly what internal reviewers use. If you check your note against this rubric before you submit, you can predict your review outcomes.
So what does PAST stand for?
P is for plain objective language, no subjective words, no judgment, no bias. A is for accurate timestamps. And facts. The time chronology is clear, the facts are quantified.
Yes.
The first S is for structured risk rationale. Your assessment links your observations to the risk level using policy criteria. And the second S is for sufficient evidence and policy alignment. All required notifications, interventions, and scope limits are met.
So using this rubric for self-audit allows you to catch defects before you even submit the note. That is the ultimate goal of the compliance-first system, meeting those measurable criteria before the note even leaves your screen, and reducing the overall anxiety that comes with high-stakes charting. So we've covered the transformation from, subjective guesswork to a compliance-first discipline.
Yeah.
You now have the language toolkit, the models ABC, the compliance-adapted SAP, the timestamp narrative, and the structures, like the 5 Cs, safe, fact, and pass, to make your documentation defensible immediately.
And the workflows, the templates, and the QA rubrics that are detailed in the source material, they're designed to make high-quality documentation faster, not slower.
That's a key point.
It is. When you eliminate that rework loop and the anxiety of a potential audit failure, you gain back time for patient care, and you gain peace of mind when you go home.
If you implement these principles, if you commit to quantifying behavior, to using the structured rationales and applying the 5 Cs, you will stop seeing those frustrating correction notices. You will start achieving that 100% first pass approval rate. This detailed, bedside-ready system is available in the Compliance First Guide to Behavioral Observation and Risk Documentation. This is your reference guide for professional self-defense.
And we ask you to consider this. When you rely on subjective labels like agitated or non-compliant, you are documenting an opinion that invites dispute and is incredibly hard to defend when your license is on the line.
But when you rely on objective facts,
Clear chronology, and policy-aligned rationale, you are documenting verifiable evidence. And that evidence protects the patient, it protects the team, and most importantly, it protects you. Start writing for the auditor today and the compliance will follow. We encourage you to download the guide and begin your 30-day compliance sprint.
You are listening to the Nurse Documentation Podcast, brought to you by Nytngale.
Nurse documentation. Protect the care you gave. Protect the license you hold. With every note you save. Nytngale, where good care is safe.